Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this lovely Tuesday evening to talk about adjustable IOLs. So this is the latest episode of Peer-to-Peer Academy. I am fortunate enough to be joined by my buddy, my fellow Wisconsinite, Dr. Jeff Banas. Jeff, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Nick, for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to join you in these talks that we like to do together in the corneal refractive space. I'm at the Eye Centers of Racine and Kenosha, about 45 minutes south of you, practicing in a very similar practice where we're heavy glaucoma, corneal refractive surgery, a little bit of retina in there too. Probably overall pretty comprehensive, but just a similar space to you as well. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, let's get to it. So tonight's talk is a 1 hour COPE approved lecture. We're talking all things adjustable IOLs, the history, the theory, kind of what's out there, and how we manage these cases. So first off, let's get to some business. These are our financial disclosures, the most relevant ones being RxI for both of us. All relevant disclosures or relationships have been mitigated for this talk. So the history, if we're going to talk about adjustable IOLs, we're going to talk about kind of where we're going. We got to know where we came from. So cataract surgery has evolved so much. It's not what we think it is today. So this started all the way back in the 5th century, long time ago. And they used to do this thing called couching. Couching was basically the French word for put to bed. What they would do is they'd take a needle and kind of stick it in the eye and just rub it around a little bit and get the lens to move out of the way. They wouldn't actually take the lens out. They just kind of push it out of the way of the visual access. You're leaving a patient aphakic at that point, essentially, with a high plus power. I'm proud to say that we've come quite a ways since the old 5th century couching days.
I would
All the
hope
way
so.
to, would you say?
I said I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank God.
look at
Thank
that
God.
success rate on it too. Only 50% of chance that we can, make you aphakic.
Well,
And
that was the 1700s. So the
well,
1700s,
that's what I'm saying. That's what you imagine going in for that, and then
yeah,
it's,
the 1700s, we actually improved to a 50% success rate, and that was extracapsular. So we're actually taking the lens out of the capsule at that point. However, still not great at doing it. The complication rates were just way high. Obviously, things like we know inflammation, infections, and endophthalmitis. That was obviously a really, really common thing. We didn't know what that was back then.
yeah,
But really, it kind of stayed that way in the 1700s until 1949. Sir Harold Ridley was the first IOL. That's not that long ago. We've been on this planet for a long time, and we just started doing cataract surgery in its most relatable form in the last century. We started doing phacoemulsification with smaller incisions in the 60s. So again, that's within our parents, Jeff. My parents were, born around then. That's in
yeah.
their generation. Foldable IOL came along in the 80s, and then we even had our first toric lens in 92. So, think about the trajectory of cataract surgery as a whole. I mean, we have really changed a lot and fast. It's like a logarithmic graph. I mean, we've
Yeah,
been steady incline.
exponentially for sure in the last, probably 10, 15 years.
Yeah. So Harold Ridley was really kind of the pioneer of what we think of modern cataract surgery. And he kind of got this idea of an implant, the first implantable lens, from an accident in World War II. So pilots would come and they would have the old cockpits were made of PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, and they would come with embedded plastic in their eye. And he made the observation that their eyes weren't responding. You'd think that if you had some piece of foreign material in any human organ, any part of the human body, that there would be an inflammatory reaction or an immediate infection. And he found that actually it wasn't. So basically, if it's a sharp plastic and it rests in contact with a sensitive mobile portion of the eye, the tissue reaction is just insignificant. And he thought, well, maybe we can do something with this. Maybe we can take this and turn it into what we now know as cataract surgery, an implantable lens. So in 49, that's when he did his first implant. And it was a 2-stage. So he did an extracapsular cataract extraction. Then 3 months later, he actually put a new lens in. The problem, and he realized this pretty quickly, is that he didn't account for the refractive index of PMMA. And he ended up with a refraction of over 14 diopters myopic. That's a pretty unhappy patient. Jeff, if I gave you a patient and we tried to do monofocal cataract surgery, they came in 14 diopters myopic.
Yeah,
Ah,
probably not pretty happy. I mean, myself, I'm a -12 without contacts or glasses, so I can relate to how miserable that is. So I would say no. You'd probably lose a patient there if you did something like that.
yeah, yeah. So thankfully, we've come a pretty far away from the -14, and I think that was I read multiple accounts of what happened. 14 was the lower end. I've heard as high as 20, so it may have been even worse than what I
Not
reported
ideal.
here.
That's quite a refractive surprise, as we like to call it. So
Yes, yeah. So he was the first one to understand what the term refractive surprise is, and he found out the hard way. And he's got a patient who, they're at least phakic now. They have a functional eye, but it's not great. Now, why do we even have a need for determining IOL power? I mean, what's so challenging about determining the power? It's not as easy as it seems, right? I mean, think of the lens providing about a third of the power of the whole eye, and the cornea providing the other two-thirds. Seems pretty simple, right? 2 + 1 = 3. There's our 3/3. But really, with our modern formulas, we have so many different variables. And the two big ones that we have are mainly axial length and also the keratometry, so the pentacam or the topography. But we're also looking at the anterior chamber depth, our white to white, the thickness of the lens, and our target refraction. If our patient wants to be plano or if they want to be myopic. Now, these are all math variables, but there's also assumptions in those variables too that we have to consider. So our A constant, that's a part of the formula. That's individualized per the IOL manufacturer. The index of refraction, we assume that 1.337 is the index of refraction of the cornea, but that's kind of an assumption. I mean, if you were to actually analyze it, it's probably a little bit different person to person. We also assume that our astigmatism is regular. We assume that the eye has two distinct axes 90 degrees apart. And Jeff, you know as well as I do, that's not the case. They're always a little bit off. And so our astigmatism kind of borders irregularity, right?
yeah, and that can make it challenging as well.
Yeah. And then we also have our variables in surgery. So what we're actually doing to the eye, we're inducing astigmatism. We're pretty good at avoiding it nowadays, but we still are inducing astigmatism on some small level. And we also assume that the lens is going to, I think the big variable here is the lens is going to sit where we expect it to. And that relies on the fact that our zonules they have to be structurally sound. And our capsulorhexis is structurally sound and it's perfectly centered. All these things can vary. We've got ways, in 2024 that we can really kind of make a better prediction, but it's not perfect. I mean, it's not perfect. We've got really good surgeons. Jeff, you and I work for two fantastic world-class surgeons, but even with their, high level of skill, there's still variability there, and that's something that we have to account for.
Yeah, I agree.
So the problem, fixed IOLs really rely on these pre-op measurements and all the data points. And even at our best with a monofocal lens, our chance of hitting a half diopter mark, that's our landing zone for these lenses, is 60 to 70%, depending on the study. And that's not great. That's a C. That's a D. In my house, my dad would have been pretty pissed about that that grade. If you're only batting, if you're hitting 60 to 70% of your mark, and there's a lot of errors for that, right? Post-op IOL position. Is the lens sitting in front of where we expect it to be? Is it sitting behind where we expect it to be? Did we induce astigmatism? Is our corneal power what we thought it was going to be? And our axial length. How long is the eyeball? We're just getting pretty good at measuring axial length, but again, we're not perfect. There's a degree of variability there. And these are all sources for error, and that's what leads to our up to 30 or 40% miss rate with standard modern monofocal IOLs. So particularly, Jeff, this is what I do, our post-laser vision correction, our LASIK patients, those are notoriously tricky. Am I right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, as you'll probably talk about here, the cornea can be kind of constantly in flux, especially after some of these, RK-like procedures. Dry eye can be induced from severing some of those corneal nerve bundles, and then that can lead to constant fluctuations in the health and the integrity of the corneal surface. So despite our best measurements, we can measure 3 times and cut once and still have things ultimately in a dynamic situation where it's still changing. So it makes it challenging.
Yeah, I think the fluctuation that can happen with patients who've had refractive surgery is one thing, and that's a moving target. But the other thing is that we have a couple assumptions that exist with our biometers. Our biometers and our calculators, our equations assume a couple of things. It assumes that our corneal curvature is proportional. So when we're doing LASIK, we're flattening the central part of that cornea. So now our peripheral cornea relative to our central cornea is no longer proportional. That's been changed. That's been permanently altered. The second thing is that the ratio of the front of our cornea to the back of the cornea, our formulas assume that that's stable, and it's not. Our front cornea is now flatter, at least in a myopic LASIK case, compared to our posterior cornea. That alters our outcome.
Hmm.
So what ends up happening is that our myopic LASIK patients end up a little bit hyperopic, and vice versa for hyperopic LASIK. They end up a little bit more myopic because of the assumptions made by the formulas relying on that 1.3375 index of refraction. So moving target, inaccurate formulas, and then the sugar on top of these patients are the trickiest ones to deal with because they know what 20/20 vision's like. They know what life is like without glasses. They have a certain expectation. So you got these three things kind of stacked against you. I'd like to do a little bit of math here real quick. So if we have a target of plano and we've got a 25 diopter lens that ends up a millimeter in front of where we think it's going to be. Quick rough math. So 7% of the IOL power for every millimeter of deviation. So 0.07 times 25 is 1.75. Now our lens is about 2/3 of the power at the spectacle plane. So what we end up with is a 1.16 diopter myopic patient by 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter deviation, you end up over a diopter myopic. That's a very unhappy. I've seen this guy before in my clinic, and he's not really pleasant to deal with. He's unhappy. He paid top dollar for maybe a premium surgery. Let's say that this is a multifocal lens. Now you've got a multifocal lens that might be having glare, halos, those types of things, plus being a diopter myopic. That's not a fun conversation to have. So we come to the adjustable lenses, our new frontier. We've got a need for this, right? We've got our post-LASIK patient base. 1996 is kind of when this started. We had our three-piece IOLs with an inflatable diaphragm that we could inject fluid post-operatively. 1996, Schwartz and Grubbs came along, and they're coming up with the earliest generation of what we know as the light adjustable lens. In 03, we have our mechanical adjustable lens with magnets, actually. And then 2019 is when the light adjustable lens became first available in the US. But not one size fits all. There's different types of IOLs. This is supposed to be a GIF. He's supposed to be dancing, the the classic. Anyways, our first, our IOLs aren't all one size fits all, or adjustable IOLs aren't one size fits all. We've got modular accommodating lenses. We've got refractive index shaping. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then our light adjustable lenses. So the modular component IOLs, these are kind of a unique concept. They're basically two-piece lenses. So the Harmony, the PresiSight, these are two of them that are on the market. They're lenses that you inject and you implant in two stages. You've got the sort of lens holder in place, and then you have an optic. The optic can be removed based on the resultant refraction. It's a pretty bulky lens. They both are pretty bulky, which does have an advantage. It's a less likely chance of having visually significant PCO early. But that's your built-in fudge factor. If you miss your mark, you take that optic out. It's a much easier surgery than taking the whole lens out. An IOL exchange can be sometimes complicated. This makes it a lot easier because you don't have to remove the whole thing. Accommodative IOLs I put in this category too. With refractive surgery, our built-in fudge factor, especially for a young patient, is to leave them a little bit hyperopic. If you leave them a little bit hyperopic, you've got that built-in accommodation to account for that hyperopia to clarify distance. You can kind of use that theory here with these accommodative lenses. The Juvene is one here that we have. It's it's a pretty bulky lens. It's a bag-filled haptic surrounding a fixed power lens attached to the fluid, a fluid-filled component. You get about 2 to 3.5 diopters of additional power with the Juvene. And then we've got the OmniView, another one of these multi-piece accommodative lenses. It's a fixed power optic with a shape-changing base. Again, it's pretty large, kind of a bulky lens, but you do have the ability to change the front optic as well. So it can accommodate. We can change the optic if we need to, if we missed our mark. And then finally, we've got the jealousy. This is one that's, again, pretty far down the pipeline. We're not really anywhere close to seeing this, but it is something that is being studied. It's up to 7 diopters of accommodation. That's a pretty big fudge factor. If you leave that patient hyperopic, um, they can accommodate through it. But then again, you have the ability to see up close. It's liquid filled with a front anterior surface. It's got those 8 haptics around it. So again, a pretty bulky lens. So refractive index shaping, this is another thing that's pretty deep in the pipeline. Perfect lens is one. We're actually using a really low power femtosecond laser to change the hydrophilicity, which decreases the refractive index. So we can implant a lens, take a laser to it below the ablation level, and actually change the shape of the index of refraction of the lens to change how it works. And that works, in early studies pretty well. Lyric is another kind of technology in the same category. Same idea, where we can take a low level of femtosecond laser energy and use it to change the index of refraction in our lens, in an implanted lens. With this, you can also use it to design a multifocal. So you could take a monofocal lens, then take a laser, and actually, at least in theory, design a multifocal depth of focus IOL out of the monofocal that you already implanted. There's also some applications here with this for contact lenses, as well as IOLs. So Jeff, why don't you introduce us to the light adjustable lens?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great job going over all of those things that we kind of have in the pipeline, Nick. Thank you there. And yeah, that kind of brings us to the light adjustable lens, which is somewhat similar to what you were kind of talking about, but really just what we have in real world now. The way this works is it's really photochemistry and diffusion. We have these solutes, these photosensitive macromers that will distribute themselves equally in a matrix. Now, when we say matrix, what do we really mean? Well, we're dealing with a silicone matrix here with polymer, resin, a cross-linker, and a platinum catalyst that we will irradiate with light, specifically a UV light 365 nanometers in wavelength. And that will then force these macromers that are in that irradiated area to polymerize, and then that creates a thermodynamically unstable diffusion gradient between the irradiated and unirradiated areas. That leaves us with unpolymerized macromers that will then diffuse into an irradiated area to restore that equal distribution and thus changing the lens shape currently. So here's what it looks like kind of with a more visual aid here. We've got that adjustment beam that's going to come in, that 365 nanometers. It's going to hit that matrix. That light is directed by the surgeon or us as the optometrist using the light delivery device. We'll have that photopolymerization. The macromers in the path of the light will then photopolymerize. Those are, diagram there in blue. You're going to get that diffusion and that power change where they're going to kind of shift position. Those unpolymerized macromers will physically move into that exposed area, causing the swelling and hence the power change. And then eventually once we're happy with the final product, we're going to lock that in, and the entire lens will then be exposed to the light to remove all the remaining macromers that have not been photopolymerized. And then that leaves you with the final result. The outcome is a precise and permanent change in power due to what we set for the patient's individual prescription.
Hold on a sec. There we go.
So here's another kind of diagram of what we would look like here. So in the real world, after we've implanted the lens, the lens is protected from exposure to unintended UV light via this coating called Active Shield, which we'll talk a little bit about later here. And then when we hit it with the UV light that's directed from the RX site light delivery device, it's going to cause that photopolymerization. Macromers in the path of the light are then photopolymerized. They're going to diffuse, and we're going to have a power change there. And then ultimately that create that swelling in the lens, and then we'll lock that into whatever final power that we want. And then that's the final outcome for the patient all the way there on the right.
Jeff, how many times can you adjust it? I get that question all the time.
So really 3 times. I think sometimes we can even trick the device into a 4th if we really wanted to. That's not recommended, and ideally you're not getting into that situation. But 3 times is what we are offered with this technology, and then there's typically 2 lock-ins afterwards. There.
Do you usually have to do? I mean, in my experience, our distance eye, our plano set eye is usually pretty easy to hit. Do you find that's the case? And then the non-dominant eye, you're taking a little more time to adjust it and fine tune?
No, no, not at all. I mean, thanks to the extended depth of focus of the lens, these patients come out. So standard of care really from our surgeons in our office is to set each eye for distance. I think that's what your surgeon is doing too. And then we get that extended depth of focus that really drives that vision into a pretty good near range, I would say, for most patients, kind of coming into the J3 range. So there's many patients that are already very happy just right after surgery. And depending, if assuming it's not something crazy like RK, this is just a standard routine cataract surgery. Those patients typically, after they stabilize 3 to 5 weeks out from surgery, are very happy, and we just kind of have to fine tune it a little bit. So typically, if I've set expectations, managed those expectations well, and we've delivered from a surgery standpoint, which we typically do, I can get away with just one adjustment. I can tweak the one eye, optimize the dominant eye for distance, tweak the other eye for near just slightly, and then that typically gives the patient enough range of vision that they're 20/20 and J1 up close, and they're happy. And then from there, sometimes I would say, maybe 30% of the time we're doing a second adjustment. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here, really. We have these prediction-based decisions that when we're dealing with a standard premium IOL, we're trying to ultimately take our measurements. You get a lifestyle assessment of the patient. You really figure out what they want to see, what their goals are from a visual standpoint, what their visual needs are. And then we ultimately have a discussion about different IOL power or different IOL options for them. We try to predict a power, and then we make a choice. And that could either be us or the surgeon making the choice on what implant we're going to implant. You then have surgery, and depending on what type of implant you've done, some of these monofocal implants that aren't adjustable can lead to reduced contrast and reduced refractive or residual refractive error. You can have potential patient postoperative risks as well, things like dryness. You can have patients not following your care, and unfortunately they can dislodge a lens if they really do something foolish there. So there are a lot of things that can lead to those refractive surprises that we talk about. Despite that measuring 3 times and cutting once, we can still have a little bit of variation there despite our best efforts.
Yeah, the conversation of what lens to implant or what a refractive target do you want as a patient? The question's weird, right? How do you want
Yeah,
to use your eyes? And everybody's very different.
I
And
want to
so,
see. That's what I want to
how-
use my eyes for, Doc.
yeah,
Yeah.
but are you a
Yeah.
professional golfer or do you like to knit? And that's really a hard concept for somebody who has a cataract. Also, remember they can't see at their maximum level yet. It's a really hard concept for them to understand. So that conversation is almost theoretical. And you're throwing at them on top of that, well, hey, this is surgery. We're cutting your eyes open. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And it's just complicated. So this gives us a chance to test drive, right?
Yeah, and that's really what's great about the light adjustable lens is we're making a decision for the patient, but even if we have that refractive surprise, or despite our best efforts in vetting the patient on their goals and their lifestyle needs, patients here can then ultimately tell us, here's where I'm at, here's what I like, and here's what I would like you to improve. So we can then adjust it to the goals that they're looking for and then ultimately lock it in. So the patient gets a say in this conversation when we're dealing with the light adjustable lens and overall their final outcomes, as opposed to our more traditional monofocal or even multifocal implants that, what you got is you got after you've healed there. Key metrics about the light adjustable lens. So this is a silicone 3-piece IOL. The power ranges from +4 diopters to +30 diopters. The diameter of the optic is 6 millimeters. Overall diameter of the lens itself, 13 millimeters. The adjustment power range is anywhere from plus to -2 diopters, and then same deal with the cylinder power. We can change that via up to -2 diopters.
Is there any difference with the surgery itself? I mean, what's Paul say when he talks about the surgery
No, I
criteria?
mean it's the same. It's the same process. It's just as easy, from my understanding, to insert this as there is really any other implant that we have available to us today. So here's kind of what the whole course looks like from pre-op to cataract surgery, the kind of timeline that we can expect for a patient and kind of deliver to them in an ideal situation. I'll be honest, I don't typically follow this exact regimen. A lot of times we're a little bit longer depending on how we're adjusting and how that patient wants to test drive. But in theory, this could be how quickly it goes. You have your pre-op, you then have your cataract surgery, you'll do your typical 1 day post-op, and then after 17 days there, typically 1 to 2 weeks, you'll have that 1 to 2 week post-op, and then following that, you could consider doing that first light adjustment after 17 days there. Then after that, you can do the adjustments every 3 days in between. So do your first adjustment, 3 days later, bring the patient back, do your second adjustment if needed. 3 days later, bring the patient back, do your third adjustment if needed. And then 3 days later, do your first lock-in. 3 days later, subsequently again, do your second lock-in. That's not typically what we experience in my clinic, not because we can't or that because we won't, but simply because I like the patient to test drive for a little bit longer, really just to give them a good, adequate assessment of where their vision's at, where their challenges might be currently after 1 or 2 adjustments, and then to kind of be able to come back to me in enough time to say, this is what I'm experiencing, and am I happy, am I not happy, just so we can really be sure with that. And that's what we're talking about, really allowing time to test drive. I'd say, one of the concerns we get is, and you can speak to this too, Nick, is, this sounds an awful lot like monovision, Doc. I didn't do well with monovision contact lenses, and it's really not the same concept. We're not talking about, one eye set for this power, the other eye set for that power, and really the disparity that's driven between the two, depending on what you set those two eyes to. But we have this extended depth of focus between the two lenses that really creates this blended vision. And when we say that to the patients, and then they really get to test drive it, 80% of the patients really elect for the option to have something like this. So LEL is becoming a big option for us in clinic in terms of what our surgeons are selecting for our patients, because of the success that they have in terms of broadening the entire range of spectrum of vision that they will ultimately achieve here.
You're totally right, man. So I get this question all the time, and I get this concern from patients. Well, I tried that monovision thing with my contacts, and I felt like I was drunk, and I drove off the road. This is not like that. I mean, the lens does have a certain level of depth of focus naturally built in, and you end up not having to sacrifice the non-dominant eye near as much. So negative 1.1, that's maybe even conservative. I mean, I find that I don't really go much. I mean, rarely ever am I going past negative 1.25. And what that eye gives up at distance is maybe a line. Even at -1, some patients are still 20/25 out of that. Now, with the LAL plus, and we'll talk a little bit more of that a little later in the talk here, that negative 1.1 has become more like negative 0.75 pretty consistently. You're getting much more broad and depth of focus. The anisometropia problems, 9 times out of 10, it's not a problem. And the beauty of this is, if it is a problem, well, hey, just undo it. You get to literally test drive it. You don't have to commit to something before you lock it in. You can test drive it, and then if they don't like it, just undo it. And that's the beauty of the whole process.
Yeah, so what can we expect when we're dealing with, the kind of workup in the clinic here, and how we get to the final results? So you're going to do your workup, or your support staff is going to do your workup. You'll have your pre-test, you'll take history, you'll take your acuity, you'll set your customization plan. Me personally, in my clinic, for these patients, I'm doing the refraction, I'm determining the final target, and I'm having the counseling with the patient, or the counseling sessions. We'll dilate the patient, we'll make sure the pupil gets large enough for us to do the treatment. You need to be able to see both haptics when you're doing the adjustments there. And then, the patient is prepped in the room, set for comfort. We put them behind the light delivery device, and then we'll do the treatment, which can be anywhere from, 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on what treatment we're doing. How do you feel about that, Nick? Does it look pretty similar for you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I have a tech that helps me out. Usually I do the refraction myself. I think that's really important. Garbage in, garbage out. This tends to not work well if the refraction is not perfect, and I'm a perfectionist. I like to do refraction myself. I give myself probably 10 to 15 minutes of chair time with that patient before we do anything, before we dilate them. So I talk to them, I counsel them, I do a quick trial frame with them, the refraction, obviously. Then we dilate them. And most of the time that they're in the office, they're sitting waiting. And that's when I go on to patient number 2, patient number 3. The treatment itself takes 2 minutes. That's easy. And I've got techs around. I've got techs around to kind of play air traffic control and move patients around. So it becomes a very efficient clinic. This doesn't have to bog you down. I always hear that from doctors too. How am I going to fit all this stuff in? It's very easy to do when you have a good support staff and you schedule it properly. But these
Yeah.
patients, I mean, you're not spending more than 15 minutes with them.
No, I think the most time that I spend with the patient is counseling them in terms of setting expectations and figuring out, which direction we want to
Mhm.
go after that. You get a quick refraction and a quick evaluation of the ocular health there, and then you move forward. It goes by pretty quick for them.
Mhm.
In terms of what ODs can and can't do with this, we get a lot of questions about is this a laser and am I allowed to do this procedure in my area? Well, a typical OD scope of practice is really just adapting and fitting any and all kinds of contact lenses. It really doesn't include any surgery or modification of human tissue or laser surgery, and that's essentially what we're doing with the light adjustment lens. We're using UV light to, like I said, change the shape of the lens. You're not modifying any human tissue. We're not actually using a laser here. We are ultimately just essentially changing the power of a lens like we would with a contact lens, just with a little bit different device and method.
This is kind of what we're
So,
doing.
we talked about the blended vision here a little bit, where we want to achieve the ability to preserve binocularity, stay away from the term monovision because it's really not truly the same thing. Again, due to that extended depth of focus. So you have your dominant eye, which is typically set for distance, the near eye typically set, or the non-dominant eye typically set for near, and there's a much larger range of overlap there because of the extended depth of focus that you get this blended vision that we like to term that patients are a lot more comfortable and accepting to, as opposed to their success rate with something like a true monovision. And this is a picture of my friend Nick. I took all the way back in the stands because I couldn't afford one of those big tickets to get down there and watch you putt on the green there. But we'll use your analogy that you like to say. The adjustments is like putting onto a green. Really, the surgeon is hitting that ball off the tee, and as long as they land somewhere on the green there and get us in the ballpark, all we got to do is putt it and really bring it home to create that hole in one for the patient. So it's a great analogy to what we're trying to achieve here in terms of what the light adjustment treatment totally looks like. We do the surgery, we get them close to target, and then we just make a few final adjustments to bring them home there.
Yeah, the thing, I guess, going back to the timeline too, like putting, you got to wait for the ball to come to a rest before you can putt it again. And
Yeah.
so we have minimum 3 days in between each adjustment, but that's the minimum. Like you guys, Jeff, I'm doing it every week. And if a patient comes back and their refraction is, if it's influenced by dryness or maybe residual inflammation from the procedure, we can always wait. That ball hasn't come to a rest yet, so let's give it another week. And patients understand that. I used to think of this process as being just incredibly laborious. I thought patients were going to hate it. They
Yeah.
don't. They really don't. I mean, they really do like to have the time, because I think at the end of the day, what patients really want is some element of control. They're very vulnerable when they come to you for cataract surgery. They don't have any real say in how it's done or what's being done. They don't know any better. So they're very vulnerable, and this gives them this added sense of control. So the time is not a negative. But yeah,
Yeah.
like golfing, you got to wait for that ball to come to rest.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Really, given the patient, they are vulnerable in the sense that they're relying on us to, deliver good results and not leave them, permanently scarred or with poor results in terms of vision. And thus, this allows them to be a part of that. Really say, here's where I'm at. Here's where I want to take some more time to really think about this and test drive that. And there's nothing wrong with that approach. There's no time limit to where you have to do this. I have patients even right now. I was doing the light adjustment treatments earlier today in my clinic, and I have patients, hey, I'm going out for family events. We got the holidays coming up. Can I come back in a month? I'm happy with where I'm at, but I really want to just make sure, with these family events and things going on, that I'm not rushing to the finish line here and making a decision that ultimately I'm going to regret. And I tell them, absolutely, you can come back 6 months from now as long as you're wearing those protective UV glasses. There's no time limit to when you have to do this. I'd prefer you don't do that. I'd prefer you come back as soon as we can to finish this for you. But yeah, you could take whatever time you need, and that kind of really eases some of the anxiety that I think some of the patients might get with, oh my God, do I have to make a decision right now? Or I'm not sure. Do I want this eye a little bit more near or that one a little bit more far? What do I want? I really don't know. And that gives them some of that control back, that they don't have to just make an on the spot decision based on all this information that we might be overloading them with. And I think that's one of the real, benefits of having an adjustable lens in our arsenal here.
Let's get to some cases. I think we all learn pretty well from some cases. So this is a pretty bread and butter one that a guy I know pretty well. 71-year-old. He's an accountant, naturally type A. He's a numbers guy. He's an avid golfer. He golfs at least 3 or 4 times a week, lives on a golf course up in northern Wisconsin. So he gets out, 100 times or so every summer at least. He's got more blur in his right eye. The referring OD noted a significant shift in the right eye. And so this is his refraction. So his right eye is a -2. Previously, he was a little bit hyperopic. So he's had a pretty significant shift. Left eye was +1. Has been wearing glasses for a while. I mean, once he hit his 50s or so, he was a low plus. So he was pretty comfortable without wearing glasses until he became fully presbyopic. Just some of the clinical data here. Good, solid, topography's there. He's not post LASIK. He doesn't have any macular pathology. There's really nothing going on clinically. So we looked at this and we said, this is an easy case for us. He wanted to be able to see his golf ball. He wanted to be able to write his score down. He didn't really have too high of a near demand. And that was, pretty what he wanted to do. He was okay with the idea of wearing reading glasses when he needed to. He likes to use his iPad in the morning to read the news or whatever. But a pretty, low near demand, but wanted to be able to see the distance. And that was key. He did not want to wear glasses when he was golfing. And so obviously for us, this is easy. This is a no brainer for us. Let's do the LAL and we'll plan to do a little bit of a mini mono or a blended vision with him. So this is how the process goes. So he came on 3/17, St. Patrick's Day. His refraction right out of the gate. This is right out of surgery, or 2.5 weeks out of surgery. He's -50. So we missed our mark in his right eye. His right eye is his dominant eye, and his left eye, we nailed it at plano. We tried to shoot for plano on both eyes, but we ended up missing. And I asked him, I said, hey, do you want to maybe leave your right eye a little myopic? Because it naturally is that. And then we could use your left eye as your dominant. And he's a hunter too, and he uses his right eye to scope. In Wisconsin, we get a lot of hunters, right, Jeff? So
yeah,
I always ask him, which eye do you scope with? He's a right eye dominant, and he wanted to switch it. No problem, let's do it. So we targeted his right eye as plano, and his left eye, we ended up going to -75. That was very comfortable. I gave him a trial frame, and he said, yep, I can see my iPad, I can see my scorecard. He brought a golf scorecard in, and he could look at it. Yep, I can see that. And we nailed it on the first try. So he ended up +1/4, which is perfect. If you're a little plus, that's not a problem. We overshot it a touch, and he was happy in the left eye. He's -1. So we ended up locking him in. And, we got a very, very happy patient. So I said, I know this guy pretty well. This is the father of my wife, my father-in-law. And, Jeff, you probably know as well as I do, there's one person in your life you don't want to piss off. It's the father of the bride. So.
Yeah, that's not a good key for success there. So I'm glad your outcomes came out as well as they did here.
Yeah.
We probably wouldn't be talking here tonight if they didn't. So
yeah, I got some serious brownie points, and I told him, man, hey, if your golf score improves, we'll take the credit, but if it gets worse, don't blame me. It's not my problem.
Yeah.
Very happy patient. Number 2, this one's not so bread and butter. This one's a little more complicated. 29-year-old. She is a news anchor in Madison, so about an hour west of us, and she came in wanting LASIK. And take a look at that prescription. I mean, Jeff, what do you do with that? With a +8 with a bunch of cylinder?
Yeah, it's pretty hyperoptic. So that's a challenge there, just getting the lens in the eye, I would imagine, for your surgeon. But you tell me what you did, my friend.
Spoilers. We did an adjustable lens.
Yeah.
But I mean, the reason that this is really appealing, well, there's a number of reasons why. We'll get to it. Here's her pentacam, her topography, regular. Good healthy cornea, very symmetrical. A lot of cylinder, but very symmetrical. The LAL obviously is what we did. A couple things. Number one, for her lifestyle. She's young. She is pre-presbyopic. We wanted the ability. We didn't. If you do a refractive lens exchange on somebody who is pre-presbyopic, you're making their eyeball 60 years old tomorrow, right? You are taking away their entire accommodative system. And you can counsel your patients as much as you want about that, but until they actually live with the inability to see up close, it can be kind of shocking. So we knew we wanted to do something that was going to give her some reading ability. Number two, she is in front of a bunch of lights every day in a news studio. The glare and the halos that you'd get from a multifocal or an extended depth of focus with a big pupil like she had would be miserable. And then the third thing, she's got a really short eyeball. So you remember earlier when I said that 7% of the IOL power per millimeter of deviation? Well, a 30 diopter lens, which is what we had to do, that was the highest lens we could get, compared to, so 7% of 30 is a lot higher than 7% of 5. So
Yeah.
if you miss by a millimeter, that is a colossal refractive miss. And so we looked at that and said, hey, man, an adjustable lens is the only way to go, or don't do surgery. So yeah, that's what we did. So take a look at that right out of the gate. I mean, we ended up pretty hyperopic. We missed our mark like we thought we might. And she came into my office. She was literally in tears this day. This is day 17. She thought she made the worst mistake of her life. I mean, she was, her eyes had healed by now. The inflammation was down. She was kind of at her plateaued potential at this point. And she's like, I think I made the worst mistake of my life. Her mom had flown in from Iowa. I gave her a hug and I said, hey, man, hang in there. And, in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, please, dear God, work. Please work. But, things ended up going great. Otherwise, I wouldn't present this case. It went beautifully. We ended up doing a little more of myopic right eye. That was her non-dominant eye, targeting negative 150. And we ended up very, very happy. Again, at the day of her final lock-in, she was again in tears, happy tears this time, because she could see better than she ever could. She was so intolerant of scleral lenses in the past. They were just uncomfortable for her. And she could never get a good fit, and her vision has always been a struggle for her. And we took her to the point where she doesn't need anything. She does wear reading glasses for small stuff if she's doing an extended, near demand, and that's okay with her. But for being on the news, if you were to watch her, she doesn't have glasses on, and I'm proud to have a part in that. Jeff, why don't you take us through some numbers?
Yeah, so real world use and outcomes, 885 subjects received the bilateral LEL implants at a total of 100 clinical practices. So a lot of people out there using this technology at that time. Patients and doctors customized refractive targets in each eye concurrently during that adjustment period. Refractive results collectively we collected those refractive results approximately 1 to 3 months after the final lock-in treatment. So we really gave it some time to see if things would be stable. So really, here's the data, and it's pretty remarkable to see the results that we got here. Absolute MRSE and astigmatism were within a half a diopter of emetropia in 93.8% of eyes and 92.5% of eyes that were targeted for emetropia. So that's incredible results. Really, we can see on both ends, and then even 97.4 for patients to be within 3/4 of a diopter and 97.1 with the astigmatism as well. So excellent.
Those are LASIK numbers. I
Yeah,
mean, LASIK, depending on the study,
yeah,
it's like 92 to 94% or so.
yeah,
That's basic.
that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So, uncorrected outcomes, binocular uncorrected distance in both percent of patients 20/20 or better, 87% right out of the gate. Percent of patients 20/25 or better, 97%, almost 100% of patients are within 20/20 to 20/25. That's also, to really speak to how incredible this technology is. Binocular uncorrected near vision, even better, J1 plus or better, 51%, and patients that are just J1, 80%. That's unheard of, I feel like, with some of these other multifocal technologies. Percent of patients J2, 92%. I mean, look at this, J3, 97%. So that's what we're talking about. We do this surgery on patients. We set them for plano for distance in both eyes, and they come out J3 or better, and they're already happy. Really makes our life easy with in terms of what we have to do from an adjustment standpoint afterwards. Some more, binocular surgery outcomes here, 87% we talked about, 20/20 or better, 97, 20/25 or better, bilateral emetropia, 92%, 98. I mean, the list goes on and on. J1 or better, 79%, J2 better, 92%, J3 better, 98%. I mean, that's across all 559 patients. And you look down, I mean, that's just incredible with the blended vision, 86%, 97%, 20/25 or better. J1 plus or better, similar numbers, a little bit better there, 53%. J3 or better, 99%. That's crazy. So
the part that gets me on this slide is the J3 or better and the bilateral emetropia. So this is a lot of data, obviously, but
Yeah.
The J3 or better bilateral plano targets. They considered emmetropia anything minus a quarter or plus a quarter. 93% J3. So that's
Yeah,
a
we're
testament.
within that standard of deviation. That's why I'm saying that's
Yeah.
just incredible
Mm-hmm.
numbers, really already. I mean, here you can see that standard of deviation over the course of a mean follow-up time 7.2 years later, 103 eyes. So these are patients that received the LAL from 2008 to 2012. We really didn't find any significant changes in vision, refraction, corneal thickness. I mean, you can see those numbers, spherical equivalence within a diopter, and their standard deviation from 1 year to 7 years out. I wouldn't say there's anything statistically significant there that's
Yeah.
being presented.
And we're like 4 years out or 5 years out from our clinic too. I see these patients now back annually, and we're not really seeing deviations. I get that question all the time. This is new. Does it last?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, this is the longest study we have, but I can say anecdotally at least 5 years.
yeah.
It doesn't shift.
I would agree. Active Shield is something a little bit newer. This was introduced in 2001, or I'm sorry, 2021. This is that enhanced UV absorber material that's placed in that silicone matrix to really just help enhance protection from that environmental UV light. We have patients from time to time that, despite our best efforts in telling them, wear your protective wear, try to minimize how much UV protection you're going to get. Patients sometimes just don't follow directions, and anecdotally, the same thing. We were probably seeing shifts in the data and the refractive results because these patients simply just weren't, using that UV protection. So now we kind of have it built in. It's nice to have that technology to kind of protect us a little bit more. And that's leading to, some of the data here from Dr. Folden and Wong in clinical ophthalmology 2022, 62 eyes total, 33 out of, 62 post-refractive, one eye targeted for plano, no visually significant pathology. 100% of them were with plus or minus a half a diopter of target. Plano targeted eyes, 97.2% were 20/20 or better. I mean, wow. And then the LAL plus, I mean, we were talking about really the extended depth of focus with the standard LAL, about 1.37 diopters. We're now getting up to, almost 1.6 here. That's due to the addition of a small continuous increase in the central lens power relative to the standard LAL. Nick, feel free to add anything to this that you might want to say.
Yeah, you're basically with the LAL Plus just broadening the depth of focus a little bit, and
Yeah.
it is, I'd say, substantial enough to the point where you don't have to undercorrect the non-dominant eye by probably a quarter to a half, and so it makes the process faster. You're getting to a functional near range quicker, and it improves the anisometropy. It improves stereopsis. You're not losing depth perception as much, and these patients tend to be more comfortable. So the LAL and LAL Plus. The LAL Plus does induce a little more aberration. That's how it's designed. And so in our practice, we tend to use mostly the LAL in highly aberrated eyes like RK, or if they've had hyperopic LASIK especially. But the LAL Plus has been a fantastic introduction for us to our portfolio, and we can further broaden our range of happy patients. What's your experience, Jeff?
I really haven't seen it, and I know it's being reported out there, but I really haven't seen an increase in aberration in the patients that we are implanting the LAL plus in. It's been if I didn't have the data to show that this was what was put in the eye, I don't know that I would have noticed a difference.
Yeah, I don't think you really do. I mean, technically, according to the data, you're giving up like a couple letters at distance, but I don't see that clinically, especially if you're comparing apples to apples, two virgin corneas, two healthy eyes. You don't give anything up at a distance, and that
No.
LAL plus eye does get a little bit more, and you can measure this. It does get a little bit better up close, and so we use it. It's a
Yeah,
fantastic
and
option.
we'll show that data. I mean, it's nice to have that optimization there. And here's that data. So, for distance, the LAL in purple versus the LAL plus in 2016 and 2020 there for distance, 2032 for intermediate, 2025. So you can see the near vision is actually improving significantly with the LAL plus as we get into that kind of 40 centimeter range versus the standard LAL there. And then, really just for comparison of some of the other products that are on the market, a proportion of subjects achieving 20/20 binocular uncorrected visual acuity percentage. I mean, the Panoptics for distance, 73%, Synergy, 67, and it just goes down from there. Vivity, 61, Symphony, 63, Apthera, 65, and the near vision numbers are, even worse there as opposed to, what we're seeing here with the LAL and the LAL plus, 92 for distance, 88, intermediate, 100, wow. Looking at that.
Yeah, so in our practice, I mean, we have mostly phased out other premium lenses because of all the negatives. I mean, the refractive mist, the halos, the glare, that sort of stuff. And I'm not talking bad about those. I mean, those lenses are fantastic. Um, but we like the ability to adjust the lens that much more. And so it makes up 93% of our lenses. Our data, our total deviation from target on average is within a quarter. Compare that to the FDA study, very comparable, with a good comparable standard deviation as well. So within a half diopter, 92%. The FDA data was 92 as well, so we're comparable there. We haven't noticed any shift. There's been no shift with the lock-in. I think that was kind of suspicion with the earlier generations of the LAL that maybe there's a shift with the post lock-in, but we have not experienced that. And like I said, I see these patients now annually. They come back. Patients that maybe you didn't want to inherit, you've inherited because you made them happy. And
Yeah.
just wait, I got a fun case for you about that.
Yeah.
Let's get to it. So this is the patient that I didn't want to have, who is now mine that I see 3 times a year. He came in. I got cataracts. He had LASIK. He moved actually from California, and he basically was demanding, I want my LASIK eyes back. And by the way, I've got a quote little bit of glaucoma. And he also started talking about sending over the consent so his attorney could review them all. Anytime I hear that word attorney, especially before we do anything, that's a red flag. I don't know about you, but that's a pretty quick. Maybe I'll send that to my buddy Jeff down the
Yeah, I
road.
was about to say that's where I'm sending him to the LAL King up in Milwaukee there.
We had some come to Jesus talks with this guy, and he admitted he came off pretty hot. And long story short, we ended up proceeding cautiously, but we did proceed. So this is his refraction there. He's correctable 20/20, a rough 20/20 in the right eye, 20/25 in the left. He's got glaucoma. Pressures are fine. LASIK scars. He's got dryness on his cornea. And he's got some maculopathy too. I mean, he's got some punctate dry AMD changes. So, I mean, for this kind of guy, he's prickly to say the least. He's got high expectations. You're not going to do a multifocal lens in this guy. I think the only thing you could do is a monofocal, which the LAL is a monofocal. It's an adjustable monofocal. Or am I sending this down to my buddy Jeff down in Reshaping? And like I said, we held on to him. Here's a topography, a little bit of irregularity there. You can kind of see a rough LASIK pattern on the right eye, but a lot of what you're seeing there is dryness. So we did have him on a regimen of tears, and I believe we started him on an immunomodulator as well. I can't recall exactly. There's his stage little bit of glaucoma. He's missing half his field of vision. So we did his visual field. We're like, holy crap, man, this is not just a little bit. This is a lot of it. You're missing quite a bit here. That's something we should probably address. Anyways, you're not going to do anything but a monofocal lens. And again, the LAL is a monofocal lens. You would put a monofocal lens in this guy. Of course you would. Anybody with macular degeneration or glaucoma or any sort of pathology, a monofocal lens would be fine. And that's what we did. For him, again, we targeted a -150. He had a pretty high near demand. And so we went -150. And this patient ended up being the patient I didn't want to keep. And now I get to see him 3 times a year because I made him happy. And that is the burden that comes with this lens. When you do a good job, you get to keep these patients forever, and they're yours to keep. So this is my buddy Blaine. Blaine and I get along well now. So I guess to sum it up, before we get into some questions, the main conclusions, take-home points: cataract surgery is refractive surgery. There is no such thing as a non-refractive cataract surgery nowadays. Patients come in with expectations. The LAL is the first available, but there are more in the pipeline, like we talked about earlier in the talk. There is plenty of things that are coming down the road here that we're going to have available to us. And we're able to get LASIK type results, really expanding the premium market. That's about it. So I encourage you, any questions? Let's get to some of the questions actually we had come through. So Jeff, let me ask you this. Targeting the near eye. So let's divide this up into LAL versus the LAL plus. What's your near target on average for the LAL?
For the LAL would be a -75. I think that gives us a good range of vision with that extended depth of focus. If we're talking the LAL plus, probably a -0.5.
Okay. Yeah, we're maybe a little bit more, but I think the luxury here is that you can adjust it patient to patient. So we're maybe -1, 1.25 for the LAL. The LAL plus, we're more like -75. But if you have a high near demand, you can go further. I almost always start them at Their
Well, I'm
first
sorry.
adjustment.
If you're saying the final result, I would say,
Yeah.
-1 to -0.25, and then similar -75 to -1 for the LAL plus. I was solely speaking on the first adjustment. That's my first target, just to see where they how they land and how they feel about it, and then go from there.
Gotcha. That made me too. Yeah. So my first target is about a half, and you kind of dip your toe into the waters of a blend and see how they respond, and then you can go further. It's again putting. You want to leave yourself an opportunity to make your second putt, and so you're trying to
Yeah.
get close, right?
If you, and my theory behind that too is if you have to reverse course for any reason, it's a lot easier to reverse course on a smaller adjustment than it is on a larger adjustment. So my initial target would be, like I said, a -75, minus a half, and then add another half if needed there.
Yeah. Do you guys do bilateral cataract extraction same day?
Yeah, typically just
Yep.
to make it more convenient for the patient and speed up the whole process in general.
Yeah, that's what we do too. We routinely do bilateral sequential same day. And I tell patients, what I tell patients and what the truth is, I guess, is a little bit different. The truth is we get paid half as much on the second eye, but this is a premium product, so that accounts for it.
Yeah.
But we like to use, with monofocal surgery, the first eye as a bit of a test. And that there's some truth to that. We like to see if we ended up myopic or hyperopic, did we miss our mark? And then we can use that to account for any miss on the second eye. So yeah, but routinely with the light adjustable lens, we're doing both. Um, Another question here: is there any way to predict prior to surgery which patients don't seem to achieve any depth of focus? So, is there any way to determine if they're not going to have any reading ability? So, example that was given: J10 near with an emmetropic goal. So, I think the question is basically: is there any way to determine if every patient is going to respond the same way to their near?
Well, the way I would answer that is we expect this lens to give us that depth of focus. It's inherently built into the lens, so they should be able to achieve somewhat. You have to manage expectations as opposed to treating complications post-operatively. So if you feel the patient is going to be not happy with anything other than J1 plus kind of deal up close, then that might be a patient that we say, look, there's no situation that exists for you that we're not going to have you in some form of glasses afterwards for those specific tasks. But I would expect a patient, if the question is, do we expect them to have some form of extended depth of focus and as opposed to none, it's in the lens. They should always have some range of vision there between both eyes.
Yeah, I think you can't forget about the cornea too. I mean,
Yeah.
patients who have irregular corneas, RK patients, for instance, tend to get really good depth of focus because their corneas are almost like multifocal contact lenses. The other thing, I think you're totally right. Expectations are huge. This is not designed to get rid of reading glasses. At least with a bilateral plano target or even a blend, you're going to need reading glasses for some stuff, and I think it's important to
Yeah.
be realistic with people. But there are cases where I have done bilateral myopic targets, and that's worked pretty. Have you done that, Jeff? Bilateral myopic targets?
Not with the light adjustable lens. We've done that in other contexts with just standard monofocal lenses based on what the patient might want. But I have had patients come out where they've been set for a more near vision target than average. So as opposed to maybe the -125 in the non-dominant eye, I'm pushing them more towards a -2, just depending on what their visual needs and their goals are. So that does happen pretty frequently. I have a lot of knitters. I have some musicians. I have patients that have certain hobby works, like they're cleaning those shotguns that we were talking about. They need to be able to see pretty close. So some of those patients, I do definitely push more towards the nearsighted spectrum in the non-dominant eye.
Well, I have done bilateral myopic patients before, and I always do it delicately, right? I mean, usually I'm not going to go to a -1 in both eyes, but the beauty of this is that the depth of focus and the broadened defocus curve does work in both directions. So my patient who I am -1 in both eyes, they probably have 20/25 uncorrected distance vision. It may be a stretch, but they can definitely do it. I always tell them, again, expectations are important here, that if you want to have your maximum level of distance visual acuity, you're going to need glasses, but you should be able to see up close very comfortably, and it's customizable. It's
Yeah.
customizable. That's the beauty of it. So
And when I've had those conversations with patients too, typically setting expectations, I've found that the priority for most people is to have, more clear distance vision with the convenience of having some near vision, as opposed to being perfectly crystal clear up close and never needing reading glasses, and only being able to see 20/40 across the room, for example, and still be able to functionally drive. I found that more patients prefer the distance to be optimized as much as possible with some near vision help, and throw on some readers occasionally from time to time when they feel they really need that additional help.
that's what we do probably 99.9% of the time. But there are a
Yeah.
few that come in and they really want
Yeah.
to have a reading, and we can do it. It's fine. But anyways, guys, we're out of time. I appreciate everybody joining us tonight, and keep an eye on your email. I'll send out a survey that for your COPE credit, and then I'll submit everything to Arbo. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.